Okay, and good morning. And to all of the veterans in there, we salute your service. By the way, it wasn't always Veterans Day. November 11th was once Armistice Day. Armistice Day, right? And it commemorated the end of World War I. World War I, Armistice Day, and I forgot the exact time, but I think it was around this time of day that World War I ended. World War I ended. So thank you for your service. My name is Evan Weiner, and I'm going to ask the Korean War vets here, why were you in Korea? Do you have any idea?
I was drafted.
You were drafted.
They sent me.
They sent me. But what were the reasons why you were in Korea? Do you know?
Yeah, because it was on 5 years after the
And 5 years after the Second War. I'm not sure about the rah-rah-rah stuff, but let's talk about it. That is my father-in-law and my mother-in-law in 1950. They're off to start their new lives after World War II. You were right, 5 years later. He's not going back into the Army, but there's a whole new batch of soldiers out there. Also, Harry Truman. We're in the middle of the Cold War. We are in the absolute midst of the Cold War in 1950. And people are looking for communists everywhere, and Truman is going to fight the communists. Korean War, was it ever a war? Was it ever a war?
Conflict.
A war, it was a conflict. But when you guys who were fighting, you knew you were in a war. But was it a war? The answer is no. It was a police action. It wasn't even a United States police action. It was a United Nations police action. And it was because of him, Mao Zedong. China is overthrown in 1949, in October of 1949. Communists take over China. Red China, Communist China, as my 9th grade social studies teacher, Stewie Geach, used to talk about. That's what you call them. They're not the People's Republic of China, they're Red China and Communist China. Of course, he grew up in that era when Mao Zedong took over. So part of the reason you went to Korea is because of him. China invaded Tibet also that year. Joe McCarthy's running around looking for communists, starting in 1950. And in Korea, who were you fighting? The communists, right? Truman is almost assassinated. General Motors becomes the most powerful company in the world. How many of you have credit cards now? Credit cards. You all have credit cards, right?
Nope.
No? No, you don't have a credit card, but everybody else has a credit card, right? Well, the thing is about the credit cards, this is the first credit card, 1950, the Diners Club. You didn't have to use it in Korea, right? You didn't have to use a credit card in Korea, right? You just went down to the post and got your stuff. This guy, how many of you enjoyed the Peanuts cartoons? Yeah? Well, globally, it hits the world. Charles Schultz, Peanuts, and Snoopy. How many of your kids played with Silly Putty? Yeah, Silly Putty comes out in 1950 as well. Silly Putty begins in 1950. The NBA desegregates. How many Knicks fans are here? NBA desegregates. The National Football League becomes bigger. And life was good in America if you weren't in Korea. How many of you had TVs in 1950? You had TVs. Didn't matter if it was an Emerson, Zenith, Admiral, Dumont. Families were moving to the suburbs. How many of you grew up in the suburbs? Anybody grew up here in Levittown? No Levittown? Oh, okay, surprising. You can watch Howdy Doody on TV. How many of you watched Howdy Doody?
Howdy Doody.
Howdy Doody. And how many of you were in the peanut gallery? Anyway, you can watch it on a black and white 12-inch TV. Generally, the husband was the breadwinner of the family. And in 1950, you could live comfortably on $3,300 a year. Americans had jobs. Well, some Americans. Jim Crow was the norm in the South. Cold War created fear of communists. A fear that a bomb could be dropped at any moment, which is part of the reason you were in Korea. Oh, only 1/3 of the U.S. households had indoor plumbing. 1/3 of U.S. households did not have indoor plumbing. How many of you were on a front like that? You were there. He was there. How about you? Any of you? Korean War wasn't a war. What?
I was Navy.
You were Navy, so you were out in the water.
I was a Navy photographer,
Oh, okay.
an aerial photographer.
Oh, so you were in the planes.
Most of the time.
Yeah, you were in the planes. So you had to be worried about being shot down.
Definitely.
About being shot
We always
down.
had a carrier air
Yeah.
patrol in the high range.
Yeah.
And we almost started World War III, as a matter of fact.
And you were pretty close to World War III.
Yes, we were.
This was a conflict between the Russians, the Chinese, and the Americans. Just happened to be in North Korea. Let's take a little background here. 1946, Winston Churchill is in Missouri. He's giving a talk at a university, invited by Harry Truman. And he talks about what was coming, the Cold War. Talks about an iron curtain had descended upon Europe, and Stalin is beginning to consolidate power in Europe, in Eastern Europe, with his allies. Well, maybe they weren't his allies, but they became his allies. Meanwhile, there's a civil war that's taking place in China between Mao Zedong's troops and Chiang Kai-shek's troops. And finally, the Maoists prevail. So you got two communist countries in that particular part of the world, the Soviets and the Chinese. Joseph Stalin in 1946 said it's inevitable that there would be a conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. Directly, never. This is the first conflict, but it's a proxy war between the Soviets and the Americans. Soviets tell the North Koreans, invade. The United States, using the cover of the United Nations, proceeds. It's a police action. How many of you were in the Army, Navy, Air Force on June 25th, 1950? You were. You were there that day. How many of you got to Korea in 51, 52, or 53? What year?
52.
52. What year?
I was there. I was never stationed in.
You were never, you were the photographer, so they sent you there.
I was
Yeah.
aboard the Hornet.
Oh, okay. So you were there. On June 25th, 1950, 75,000 soldiers from North Korea pour across the 38th parallel, the boundary between the Soviet-backed Democratic People's Republic of Korea to the north and the pro-West Republic of Korea to the south. This would be the first action in the Cold War, and this had been percolating since 1946. In July, American troops entered the war. Anybody there in 1950? Nobody was there in 1950. And it was basically this for the American officials. It was a war against forces of international communism. They were going to fight communism, and that's why you were there. You weren't there because you might have been patriotic, but the reason you were there was that you were fighting against communists. The seeds of war start earlier, 1946. Kim Il-sung goes to Moscow in 1959, and the Kim family, the dictators in North Korea, they were not from God. They were not divinity. That was what was sold. This guy was a Soviet backer. He was in the Soviet army in the 1930s. Stalin liked him an awful lot. After the war in 1945, Stalin made sure that he was running a part of Korea. So he goes to Moscow in 1949 and says to Stalin, hey, you know what? Can we invade? Can we invade? Will you help us? Stalin says no in 1949. But in 1950, Kim gets the support of Stalin and now also Mao Zedong. And he invades the South. Oh, thousands of troops are sent from China into South Korea. And the Americans feel that they have no alternative. They have to go to Korea and fight. General Douglas MacArthur thought it would be a rather quick, just mop-up situation. Was MacArthur there when you were there? Or was he fired by that point?
He did the wrong thing.
Yeah, they fired him.
They dumped him.
Yeah, they dumped him. But he thought it's going to be an easy peasy piece of cake. But on the first day of the war, the United Nations Security Council said to North Korea and Kim, stop fighting. Go back to the border, the 38th parallel. Kim said no, absolutely not. UN passes a second ordinance asking Kim to go back. No, not going to do it. So the UN says to member states, hey, let's go fight. Let's get him back. And the United States would be in the lead. General Douglas MacArthur would be the guy who is leading the troops. The United States, South Korea provided most of the manpower and military equipment. There were 15 other countries, including United Kingdom, France, Australia, Canada, Turkey, and Ethiopia, who sent troops there. Did you line up with any of those, or just Americans?
Mostly not.
Mostly Americans. Anybody line up with the other troops? No, just the Americans. Okay, there's Mao Zedong, Joseph Stalin, and Korea. They decided they're going to go after the Americans. Now, Stalin didn't necessarily get along with Franklin Roosevelt or Harry Truman. The Russians had an inferiority complex. The Russians did a lot of the fighting in World War II and did win a lot of battles in the Eastern Theater in Europe in World War II. He felt the Americans took them for granted and never took the Soviets all that seriously. This is his opportunity to get back at America. China enters the war in October on the North Korean side. And MacArthur said, hey, it's no big deal. China, they're not going to do anything. We don't have to worry about them. We'll take care of them real fast. Remember, I'm only talking about 1950 here. I'm not talking about past 1950. And MacArthur tells Harry Truman, if the Chinese get involved, there would be the greatest slaughter. He's proven wrong quickly. November 1950, an attack by the Chinese sent the overextended American troops into the longest retreat in American history. Things are not going well initially for the Americans in Korea. It was nicknamed the Big Bug Out. Following the Big Bug Out, the Truman administration folded. They basically said, we're not going to unify Korea under the Republic of Korea or the South Koreans, and let's start negotiating with the communists. Let's see where we could go. Truman does not want to start World War III. MacArthur might want to start World War III. Truman is holding back. MacArthur keeps saying, let's escalate, let's escalate, let's escalate. And you know what? I want to attack bases in China. Pentagon says no. He says, that's an enormous handicap without precedent in military history. He also wanted to blockade China and bring in the Chinese nationalist, Chiang Kai-shek, the Sung family, into the conflict, among all other measures. Who is this guy Mao Zedong, and why was he important to World War, or rather to the Korean War? He kind of helped the Americans during World War II when the Chinese were fighting the Japanese in World War II. So how many of you in Korea are thinking about, we're just there, we're doing our job, and not thinking that we're fighting against this guy, Mao Zedong, when you were there? Did you ever think of Mao Zedong? No. No, you're just a soldier. Just a soldier. Throughout the 1930s and into World War II, Mao forces continued their attacks on the then Chinese government, Chiang Kai-shek. They were victorious in 1949, and the Communist People's Republic of China was declared that year. That's October 1st, 1949, and that basically leads you into the Korean conflict. The Communists gained control of the mainland of China forced the leadership of the Republic of China to retreat to the island of Taiwan. There's been a lasting political and military standoff with the Chinese government of Taiwan and the mainland government since then. Both of them claim to be the legitimate government of China. But Mao Zedong decides, we're going to back the North Koreans here. There's Chiang Kai-shek and Mao in 1945. Mao prevailed. China went communist. The United States backed the nationalists against the invading Japanese forces during World War II, and they supported Chiang Kai-shek's exile, Republic of China government in Taipei. Treaty between Stalin and Mao Zedong helps expedite the Korean War. The Sinai-Soviet Treaty of Friendship, Alliance, and Mutual Assistance, or the Sinai-Soviet Treaty of Friendship and Alliance, is signed by the People's Republic of China and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics on February 14th. The Soviets recognized the People's Republic of China and recalled the ambassadors and recognition of the Republic of China, which is now in Taiwan. And there's Chiang Kai-shek and Douglas MacArthur. And this leads right into the battle. On March 1st, Chiang Kai-shek resumed the presidency of the National China and Taiwan. May 8th, he asks the U.S. for weapons. On July 1st and August 1st, General Douglas MacArthur arrives in Taipei to confer with Chiang Kai-shek on Taiwan defense. Washington and Taipei are allies. Also going on at the same time, against American wishes, Chinese invade Tibet. And how many of you know who the Dalai Lama is? You know who was the leader of Tibet?
Right.
There he is as a young kid. The Dalai Lama in the 1950s. Mao Zedong is becoming an American problem. He threatens Tibet with liberation. On October 7th, 1949, China enforces a long-held claim to Tibet with an invasion. 1 month after China invades Tibet, El Salvador sponsored a complaint by the Tibetan government at the UN, but India and the United Kingdom prevented the complaint from being debated. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on, in the world at this point, whereby the Americans have to get involved with what's going on. In April, the National Security Council 68 report was completed, presented to Harry Truman. The report contained recommendations on how to approach the Cold War with the Soviet Union. The report suggested that the United States should pursue an aggressive military expansion, build up nuclear weaponry, and also a policy of containment against the communists. So you were sent to Korea as part of this policy that they formulated in April of 1950. Cold War is going on. That is Moscow during one of their parades showing off their weaponry. So this is a battle between the Soviets, the Chinese, and the Americans that you're involved with. And you are patriotic. You're going out there and you're fighting for your country. And that is what was going on. Soviets, communists weren't fighting for their country. Soviets weren't. The Chinese weren't. But they used North Korea as a tool against people like you and other American soldiers. And also, you got to remember what's going on in the Cold War. In 1947, the House and Un-American Activities Committee brought the Cold War home in another way. The committee began a series of hearings to show that communist subversion in the United States was alive and well. In Hollywood, the House on Un-American Activities forced hundreds of people who worked in the movie industry to renounce left-wing political beliefs, testify against one another. More than 500 people lost their jobs. Many of these blacklisted writers, directors, actors, and others were unable to work again for more than a decade. Oh, also, the House on Un-American Activities Committee accused State Department workers of engaging in subversive activities. Joe McCarthy. Joe McCarthy. Joe McCarthy. Yeah, I could see the reaction of all of you to Joe McCarthy. He was a cancer. Who is Joe McCarthy? Who is he? This is a question that still has not been answered. He was a senator from Wisconsin. He's an obscure senator. He's a backseater, so to speak, backbencher. And he's in Wheeling, West Virginia in February of 1950. Now, Wheeling, West Virginia, I was there 4 years ago, is a shell of its former self. It's in one of the 5 or 6 counties that's among the poorest in the United States. But in 1950, Wheeling, West Virginia had Wheeling Steel. They had a port. They had coal mining. There was a lot of money in Wheeling, West Virginia. And it was a good spot for Joe McCarthy to start his rants against communism. So he's doing this news conference, and he's holding something in Wheeling, West Virginia. And the surprising thing is, there's a lot of media members there with him. So on February 9th, he's giving a speech to the Women's Republican Club of Wheeling. And he says there are 205 card-carrying members in the State Department. That caused a furor, and he's in the headlines across the country. But he's called to testify before a Senate committee. Produce him. We want names. He can't provide one name. Can't provide one name. But the war is on against communists. Starting in the late 1940s, Americans became obsessed with rooting out communists and communist sympathizers, using allegations that were often founded with tenuous evidence or outright lies. The Red Scare ruined lives and movements and pushed the country deeper into an area of gossip, paranoia, struggle between national security, individual rights. McCarthy, aided by friendly journalists, capitalized on those fears. That is Wheeling today. And if you look at Wheeling today, it's run down. It's absolutely run down. There are plenty of vacant lots in there. But in 1950, there was a lot of money there. And it disappeared with the steel industry and the coal mine industry. He goes on the anti-communist crusade. Right at the same time the Korean police action starts. He appeared to his supporter, he was a patriot, Tail Gunner Joe, right? He was Tail Gunner Joe. And his detractors as an irresponsible, self-seeking witch hunter who was undermining the country's traditions of civil liberties. Truman established loyalty boards. Anybody here had to take an oath to work in the government? Anybody? You did?
We did go into service.
In the service you had to. In the service you had to. That evaluated and dismissed federal employees on reasonable grounds for disbelief in disloyalty. Supreme Court upheld the Red Scare policies, including a law that banned communist teachers from New York public schools. McCarthy also alleged that the LGBT government employees, lesbian and gay employees, could be blackmailed by enemy agents, communists, over their sexuality, and thereby betray national secrets. In 1950, a special report drawn up by the senator's Republican allies, Senate minority at the time, cited gay and lesbian workers as a potential moral threat to the workings of the government. And it's within this background that the Korean police action starts. Oh, also you had something else going on. The Rosenbergs, Greenglass, Klaus Fuchs, spy, giving away nuclear secrets to the Soviets. Karl Fuchs was a German physicist, atomic spy, who supplied information from the American, the Brits, and Canadians, Manhattan Project members to the Soviet Union shortly after World War II, getting back to the 5 years. While at Los Alamos National Laboratory, Fuchs was responsible for many significant calculations relating to the first nuclear weapons and early models of the hydrogen bomb. It was not until 1949, 4 years after World War II, that decrypted cables from the United States Army's Signal Intelligence Services Verona project revealed that Fuchs was a Soviet spy. He was arrested in January and charged with violating the Official Secrets Act. He admitted to spying for the USSR. He was convicted for espionage in March. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison, served 9. His testimony. Yes?
My wife lived in that house where David Greenglass.
Greenglass, who was the Rosenbergs. Yeah.
And David Greenglass,
Yeah.
brother and sister.
Yes. His testimony led to the arrest of Harry Gold.
And one night,
Yeah.
visiting my wife, we weren't married at that
Yeah.
time, and I came down the stairs,
Yeah.
and underneath the stairs, 2 FBI agents stopped me.
Oh, to find out what you were doing.
Where I was going.
Yeah.
My wife lived on the first floor, the Greenglasses lived right above.
Yeah. So he was stopped by an FBI agent.
2 FBI agents.
Two FBI agents in your house, right?
No, not my
No,
wife.
my wife
Not
was
my wife,
living.
no.
Girlfriend.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, girlfriend. And he was stopped because they were looking for spies.
Because they knew
Yeah.
that Greenglass was pulling stuff.
Yeah.
He worked in the nuclear war
Yeah.
in Nevada.
No, that
Yes.
doesn't look like a
So his testimony leads to the arrest of Harry Gold, David Greenglass, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. This is what's going on in 1950 and leading to the war. Truman orders hell bomb made, the hydrogen bomb development. And MacArthur wanted to use it in China. On January 31st, Truman publicly announces his decision to support the development of a hydrogen bomb, a weapon theorized to be hundreds of times more powerful than atomic weapons dropped on Japan during World War II. In 1949, another reason you're in Vietnam, Korea, the United States lost its nuclear supremacy when the USSR successfully detonated an atomic bomb. Several weeks after that, the British and the U.S. intelligence agencies came to the conclusion that was Klaus, who was a spy, Klaus Fuchs. And there is Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. That picture is backwards, actually, because you can see by the piece of cloth in his pocket, it should be the other way. 1939. The two were they were active members of the Communist Party of the United States. 1940, he obtained a job as a civil engineer with the U.S. Army Single Corps. He and Ethel began working together to disclose U.S. military secrets to the Soviets.
It was never said that Ethel was part of it.
Yes, yeah, they never proved that she was part of
She was
it.
never part of it.
Yeah.
And they were the first couple that was executed.
They were, well, that comes in 1953. And they were executed in 1953. Ethel's brother was Sergeant David Greenglass, signed as a machinist to the Manhattan Project to build the atomic bomb. He provided the Rosenbergs with data on the nuclear weapons. The Rosenbergs turned it over to Harry Gold, a Swiss-born courier for an espionage ring, passed it on to Anatoly A. Yakovlev, the Soviet vice consul in New York City. And there is Julius Rosenberg. He was discharged by the Army in 1945. He lied about his membership in the Communist Party. Gold was arrested May 23rd, right before the start of the Korean War, in the case of the British spy Klaus Fuchs, who had been arrested for giving U.S. and British nuclear secrets to the Soviet Union. They end up in Sing Sing. Sing Sing is still there. There I was last October in Sing Sing, just checking out the joint. Julius Rosenberg was arrested on suspicion of espionage June 17th and accused of having a spy ring that passed top secret information concerning the atomic bomb to the Soviet Union. Greenglass was arrested in July, Ethel in August. Another conspirator, Morton Sobel, college classmate of Julius Rosenberg, fled to Mexico but was extradited. Meanwhile, there are some people who don't like Harry Truman. There were a lot of people who didn't like Harry Truman. He wasn't exactly the most popular president, although he somehow won re-election in 1948. But somebody really wanted to do something about it, to get rid of Truman. And they were Puerto Rican nationals. On November 1st, Puerto Rican nationals, Hilario Torresola and Oscar Collazo, attempted to assassinate Harry Truman at the Blair House in Washington. The attack was thwarted by White House police, including Officer Leslie Coughlin, who was killed in the line of duty. One of them killed, Collazo was wounded, Torricello was killed. They both belonged to the extremist Puerto Rican Nationalist Party. They wanted independence from the United States. The Independentistas had targeted Truman on July 4th when he signed the Public Law 600, which gave the Puerto Ricans the right to write their own constitution. Guam becomes a part of the United States in 1950. Well, actually, it becomes its own government. It had been part of the United States since the Spanish-American War. In 1898, where the United States picked up Puerto Rico, Cuba, Philippines, and Guam, along with some other islands in the Pacific. The United States got out of Cuba in 1902, and they got out of the Philippines in 1946. After World War II, the Guam Organic Act of 1950 established Guam as an unincorporated, organized territory of the United States, provided the structure of the island's civilian government, granted people U.S. citizenship. Is it coincidental that Guam came into the United States fold in 1950? Look at where Guam is on the map. Look at where it is on the map. Where's it closest to? North Korea and China. To this day, Guam is essential to what is going on in the Pacific. Guam is the first, if North Korea ever sent a hydrogen bomb, if they ever sent a hydrogen bomb, the first place that they can hit closest is Guam. Guam is a big military island. Pacific hotspots nearby. Guam is 30 miles long. U.S. citizens on Guam cannot vote for president. Their congressman or woman is a non-voting member. It is the most important military outpost in Asia and closest to North Korea. Oh, Middle East. Middle East is a powder keg. 72 years later, I could say the same thing, right? The Middle East is a powder keg, right? It's a change? No. On July 5th in Israel, the law of return was passed, which gives Jews the right to relocate in Israel and acquire Israeli citizenship. Section 1 of the law of return declares that every Jew has the right to come to this country as an Olah or immigrant. The West Bank is annexed by Jordan. The Gaza Strip falls under Egyptian control. 960,000 Palestinian refugees, mostly in Gaza, Jordan, and Lebanon, are registered for relief by the UN. On June 17th, Egypt, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and Syria signed a security pact. Basically, the security pact says, we gotta get rid of Israel. Oh, and South Africa. Nelson Mandela is about ready to come there and do some stuff. But the South African government is tightening its grip on segregation. Group Areas Act. The Group Areas Act was the mechanism which allowed cities and towns in South Africa to be divided into segregated residential and business areas. Thousands of colored, blacks, and Indians were removed from areas classified for white occupation. The Groups Areas Act and the Land Act maintained racial segregation there. Hey, how many of you seen the movie about the Great Brinks robbery?
Yeah,
Yeah, you saw it?
I saw
You
it.
saw it? You saw it? How many else saw it?
God, it's
A long time ago, right?
I don't remember.
You don't remember it, but it actually happened in 1950 in Boston. $1.5 million. 7 masked men
Oh,
robbed
and then make the loop.
Brinks, Boston. Leave another million. Armed robbery of the Brinks building. Can I get some water? Anybody here to get water? Oh, anyway. Armed robbery. Brinks building. East corner of Prince Street and Commerce Street. North end of Boston. On January 17th. Thank you for the water.
Sure.
$2.7 million. $29 million in today's money. Theft, $1.2 million in cash, and also $1.5 million in checks, money orders, and security. Thank you. In the history of the United States, it was the largest robbery and remained so until 1984. The robbery, skillfully executed with few clues left at the scene. Crime in the century. It was the work of an 11-man gang, 10 of whom were eventually arrested. How many of you had a car that looked like that? Or a car? What were your cars in the 1950s? You remember?
Invisible.
Invisible?
I
Okay.
didn't have one.
You didn't have one. Who had cars in the 1950s? You did. What kind of car did you have?
Plymouth and Chrysler.
Plymouth and Chrysler. What'd you have?
Same.
Same. Plymouth and Chrysler.
Buick.
You had a Buick. That's a GM car.
What do you have?
That's a GM
I
car.
had a Dodge.
You had a Dodge. It's a Chrysler car.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Lousy.
it was lousy. That's why they went bankrupt in the 70s, right? The Chevrolet Bel Air. Now, General Motors has a problem. And they know that they're going to be broken up by the Justice Department if they go over 50% of the market. So they tried to keep it down under 50%. By 1950, General Motors had about 40 to 45% of the total automobile sales in the U.S. GM was one of the largest employers in the world. On March 13th, General Motors reported a profit of $656,434,232. Multiply that by about 25 today, and you come up to well over $10 trillion. GM operated 6 divisions at a time, one of which, GMC, sold only trucks. The 5 others, there was a hierarchy. Cadillac was on top. Anybody own the Cadillac? You own the Cadillac. You were on top. Buick, number 2. How many Buicks? You had a Buick. Oldsmobile, number 3. Anybody with an Oldsmobile? You were in the middle. Pontiac. Any Pontiacs here? No Pontiacs. That was number 4. And the good old Chevrolet. See the USA drive a Chevrolet. Anybody with a Chevrolet? You had a Chevrolet. You had a what?
I had their first 8.2 liter diesel.
Oh, you had a diesel. Diesel there first. Suburban. Anyway, so they cornered the market. At this point, Ford is struggling to survive, and there was Chrysler. How many of you use charge cards today?
Almost everybody.
Most everybody uses a charge card. When you were growing up, was there such a thing as a charge card? Sears. There were charge cards. There were for department stores like Sears and others. There were some charge cards. Well, this guy, Francis X. McNamara, is at a restaurant in Manhattan. And guess what? He has no money. He left his wallet at home. And he has a big, big, big problem. His money is at home. And he brings people out. You know, he's paying for a meal. He has no money. And he's too embarrassed to ask his guests, can I borrow $5 here, you know? Anyway, so this is 1949. He goes out to eat with Alfred Bloomingdale. You would presume have some money, right? and his longtime friend, the grandson of the founder of Bloomingdale's, and Ralph Schneider, his attorney. Three men are eating at the Major Cabin Grill, which is a New York restaurant located next to the Empire State Building. At the end of his meal, reaches into his wallet, and guess what?
No money.
Nothing there. Nothing there. So he's embarrassed. Calls his wife, come down here. Bail me out. I can't ask them. Now, if it was you and you forgot your wallet, even though you invited them out, would you ask to borrow money? He wouldn't, it's just pride, right? So he vowed never, ever, ever to have this happen again. So he decides to talk to Bloomberg and Snyder, and the three of them decide they're going to start a new company. They called it the Diners Club, and it issued its first credit cards on May 13th, and that is Alfred Bloomingdale's first credit card. He was one of the founders of the company. The original credit card was not a credit card. It was a charge card. And it didn't have revolving credit, just charged its members fees every month rather than interest. People using the card had to pay it off every month. How many of you had that?
Yeah.
Anybody remember their first TV?
Yeah.
What was it? What was it?
Oh, I don't remember what it was.
Philco. Yes.
The TV that we got, all the children are in, the doorbell
Yeah.
rings.
Oh,
Great big TV comes from the mafia in New Jersey.
Oh, okay. I had a woman years ago telling me a story. She says that I get my first TV. She says, I have two kids, can never get a babysitter. I mean, the babysitters would just leave because the two kids were hard to watch. Then she gets a TV. She's living in an apartment building in the Bronx. She gets a TV. All of a sudden, every available babysitter wants to babysit the children.
Right.
Why? Because they can watch TV. Anyway, TV, 1950. Anybody here hear of Hazel Scott? Okay, Hazel Scott.
Black actress.
She was married to Adam Clayton Powell, but she was a very, very talented woman. Piano player, actress. She's the first African-American, first person of color ever to host a network TV show in the United States. But she's accused of being a communist. The war is going on in Korea at this point. It's all in against communism. 1950, she starts a show on the Dumont Network, July the 3rd. But she's named in red channels, communist sympathizer. She's married to Adam Clayton Powell, and he says, under no circumstances are you to go before the House Un-American Activities Committee. She said, I got to clear my name. Big mistake. She goes there on September 22nd. By September 29th, the sponsors pull out of her show, and her show is gone on Dumont. A radio star is asked to do TV. Lucille Ball finally gets something that she can sink her teeth into. She'd been on radio, she'd done all kind of B movies, but she was never a star. She was just a journeywoman, performer on radio and in the movies. She's approached to do a TV show on CBS. She has no leverage. However, she decides she's going to try to have leverage because they asked her. And she said that, okay, I'll do a show. But I want my husband, Desi Arnaz, to be the co-star of the show. Maybe because she wanted to save her marriage. CBS said no. The potential sponsor, General Foods Jell-O, said no. The American public would never, ever accept a Cuban exile. Desi, and he was thrown out of Cuba in 1933 because his politically connected father was on the wrong side of the Sergeant's Revolution, or revolt, Batista there, would never accept Desi as the husband of a red-blooded American girl from Jamestown, New York. Hey, she has a radio show. It's successful, starring Richard Denning as her co-star. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, she says no. Jello drops out. Philip Morris comes in. Oh, Lucy wants to save her marriage, working together. Yes, they were married. They were married. Lucy tells CBS, you can have both of us or none of us. But CBS really wants Lucy, sis. And yeah, okay, yeah. We're not sure this is a good idea. Desi had a strong Cuban accent.
Right.
Desi was Cuban. More importantly, Desi and Lucy were an interracial or multi-ethnic couple. Yeah, they were legally married. But you gotta understand, you gotta go back to 1877 to understand why Jello and CBS said no. Rutherford B. Hayes was president of the United States in 1877. The American Civil Rights Movement stalled, ended with the Hayes-Tilden presidential race in 1876. Nobody knows who won that race. Nobody to this day. Hayes becomes president after the Democrats in the South cut a deal with the Republicans. The Democrats say, get out of the South. Get the troops out of South Carolina. Get them out of Louisiana. Give us states' rights, and we'll give you the Oval Office. Oh, by the way, interracial marriage was illegal in more than a dozen states, 1877. When Lucy and Desi started in 1950, interracial marriage was against the law in 17 states. They go on tour, prove that they are, as a couple, believable. And nobody worried about the fact that Desi was not Caucasian. CBS went ahead with the show. They literally put up money for the show. And the show starts in 1951. And is anybody in here not like I Love Lucy? Virtually everybody liked I Love Lucy, but it almost never got on the air because of that. Thea Gibson, I don't know how many of you are tennis players or follow tennis, but Thea Gibson was finally invited to play in the U.S. Open. And she was clearly worthy of an invitation to big events, but she wasn't invited. In July 1950, Alice Marble, great tennis player, wrote in the American Lawn Tennis magazine that she should be judged on her merit, not on her skin color. Miss Gibson is over a very cunningly wrought barrel. She's not being judged by the yardstick of her ability, but by the fact her pigmentation is somewhat different. She's a fellow tennis player, and as such, deserving of a chance to prove herself. On August 22nd, she made her U.S. Open debut. The NBA barred Negroes. The NBA had a color barrier the first 4 years of its existence.